Alright, let's hop right to it. Our first chapter is a general introduction into biology, appropriately titled Principles of Life. This PowerPoint will focus on what constitutes life, how life develops, and organization among living things. Biology, if you did not already know, is the study of life. Biologists study all living things from single-cell to multi-cell organisms. If it is alive, it falls under the biology umbrella. All living things are descended from a common ancestor that only had a single cell. Characteristics shared by all living things leads to the logical conclusion that all life has a common ancestor. We will discuss these common characteristics in the next few slides. What are common characteristics that all living organisms share? First, all living things are composed of similar structures and similar chemical components, such as cells and proteins. Living organisms depend on these structures to interact in order to maintain life. These may be chemical pathways or organ systems working together to maintain homeostasis. Third, all living organisms contain genetic information that use a universal code for amino acids. We'll learn more about that later in the semester. Other common characteristics that all life share are that living organisms must be able to extract energy from the living environment in order to maintain life. They must be able to replicate their genetic information in the form of DNA and RNA. Also, all life shares structural similarities between genes. For instance, genes that code for pigments in animals also code for pigments in humans. Also, life tends to evolve through gradual changes. The picture on the right is a picture of the bone, the ulna. You can see how it is different among this group of vertebrates. It has changed over time to give this organism distinct advantages and differences. Alright, this slide is what I like to call a progress check. During the course of my lectures, I try to put some questions after the end of a topic. These questions typically show up on my quizzes or exams in one form or another. I tend to ask main ideas with these questions, so go ahead and try to answer these. I'll give you about a minute or so before we continue the lecture. Good luck! Alright, hope you're able to answer those progress checks. Like I said, we'll see them throughout the course of the semester in my lectures. But before we continue into the history of the first living organisms in the next few slides, I want to share this cartoon about viruses. The virus says to the two cells, "You'll never catch me alive." The first cell says to his buddy, "You know he's right. He's not technically alive." What a twist! Why aren't viruses technically alive? Think about what characteristics that all life share. Do viruses share all these characteristics? Feel free to do a little research on that question. Also, there is some information in your book that can be useful to answer this, because you'll probably see this question again at some later point in the semester. The next few slides are going to discuss the history of early life, how life was able to develop on Earth. The Earth developed about 4.5 billion years ago. However, life didn't develop until 600 million years later. So what changed? What made the Earth habitable for life? It is thought that biological molecules rose from random association with chemicals in the environment. This means that chemicals were able to bump into one another and form more complex chemicals based on their chemistry. Experiments that simulated conditions on early Earth showed that this was possible. Nucleic acids were able to be produced in the oceans. Nucleic acids are important because they can replicate and contain information for proteins. These proteins are able to participate and facilitate chemical reactions. This is believed to be the first critical step for life to develop. Next step that would have had to occur was the formation of a cell membrane. Biological molecules such as nucleic acids would have become enclosed within a membrane. Cell membranes are composed of fatty acids, which were found in the early oceans. These fatty acids would protect the nucleic acids from changes in the water. The membrane would separate the nucleic acids from the environment. These would have been the first cells. For the next 2 billion years, these single-celled organisms were what are called prokaryotes. The oceans protected prokaryotes from damaging UV rays since there was little oxygen and no ozone layer within the atmosphere. So what are prokaryotes? Prokaryotes are single-cell organisms that do not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. Bacteria are prokaryotes. Their DNA is not in a nucleus. We will learn a little bit more about the nucleus in another lecture. This picture is an example of a prokaryote. It is surrounded by a membrane, which is labeled. Inside is the DNA, protein, and ribosomes. Prokaryotic cells are less complex than cells that you and I have. Next major step for life was the formation of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis evolved around 2.7 billion years ago. We will learn about photosynthesis in a later chapter. However, the short definition of photosynthesis is the utilization of light energy to produce carbohydrates such as glucose. This is often done with chlorophyll in plants. So in short, the energy of sunlight is used to produce biological molecules. The earliest photosynthetic organisms were similar to cyanobacteria. Oscillatorия, which you see in the bottom right here, and that you will see in your Bio 111 lab, is an example of a cyanobacteria. The reason that photosynthesis is important to early life is that a byproduct is oxygen, this oxygen then began to accumulate within the atmosphere. These two pictures here are more examples of cyanobacteria. The cyanobacteria is encrusted in these rocks. On these rocks are many tiny single-celled prokaryotic cyanobacteria that give these rocks their unique colors. So why do we care about photosynthesis in the history of early life? Well, as it turns out, oxygen was very poisonous to many early prokaryotic organisms. Some organisms that could tolerate this increase in oxygen were able to evolve aerobic metabolism. Aerobic metabolism is more efficient than anaerobic metabolism. This means that aerobic organisms could produce more energy. These organisms were able to grow larger and be more successful. Most organisms today use aerobic metabolism. Not only did oxygen promote aerobic metabolism, but also helped develop the ozone layer. This helped to shield UV light from reaching the Earth's surface. This helped organisms to move from the oceans to the land. Over time, some cells were able to develop special membrane-enclosed compartments within them. These enclosed compartments are called organelles and allow the cell to perform specialized functions. One special membrane-enclosed organelle is called the nucleus. The nucleus contains the cell's genetic information. These cells that have membrane-bound organelles are called eukaryotes. As we mentioned before, prokaryotes lack nuclei and other internal compartments. The picture on the bottom right is an example of a eukaryotic cell with its membrane-bound organelles. So how did these organelles develop? Some researchers think that some organelles develop through endosymbiosis. Endosymbiosis is when a larger cell engulfs a smaller one. For some reason, the cell does not eat the smaller cell, because they get some advantage from keeping it. This is what researchers think is how mitochondria came to be. They think that a large eukaryotic cell engulfed a small one. Mitochondria in turn produce energy for the cell. Likewise, this is what is also believed how some eukaryotic organisms were able to photosynthesize. It is believed that a eukaryotic cell engulfed a photosynthetic prokaryotic cell. After eukaryotic cells developed, multicelled organisms came about 1 billion years ago. Before this, all living organisms were single-celled. So what led to multicellular organisms? Cellular specialization occurred. This is where a cell becomes specialized to perform a specific function. This could be a cell that has specific enzymes for a particular chemical pathway, or a cell with a specific structure to aid in feeding, such as cilia or flagella. Multicellular eukaryotes become bigger and able to adapt to specific environments. Here is our next progress check. These two questions are specific to the last couple of slides from our PowerPoint. Go ahead and give them a shot. Take your time. Next, we're going to talk about how organisms are classified and how they are related. Each species has a distinct scientific name, also referred to as a binomial name. This means that there are two parts to their name. Binomial name is made of the organism's genus and species. The scientific name must be italicized or underlined when writing or typing it. The first letter of the genus name is capitalized and the species' first letter is always lowercase. Some examples would be Homo sapien. Look in the mirror for an example of that species. Another example of binomial name would be Hippocampus erectus, or also commonly referred to as the line seahorse. And on the bottom right, or bottom, we have what is called Diatoma vulgare, which is a single-celled algae. These scientific names can show relationships between different species. Mutations, which is a change in the genome, can occur when DNA is replicated. Some mutations may give rise to structural and functional changes within an organism. From this, a new species may arise. On the right are similar but different species of the ancestor of the horse. Changes to their DNA have led to the hoof of the horse, and a different species than what came before. A species' evolutionary relationship can be determined by comparing genomes. Genetic sequencing has also added molecular evidence to the fossil record. This molecular evidence have allowed scientists to create what are called phylogenetic trees. This type of diagram illustrates the evolutionary relationship among organisms. This slide here illustrates a phylogenetic tree. Organisms that are closer together on the tree share more similar DNA than with those that are further apart. For instance, by looking at this tree, fungi and animals have more similar DNA with one another than they do with plants. As you can see further away up on the tree here. Relationships within the tree are based on fossils, molecular evidence, structural, metabolic processes, and behavior. Researchers often look at all this to determine where an organism sits on a phylogenetic tree. Based on the tree, all organisms that are alive today came from one single common ancestor. Today, all living organisms can be grouped into what are called domains, and there are 3 of them. The domains are bacteria, which are the prokaryotes, archaea, which is another group of prokaryotes, eukarya, which are eukaryotes. Because all life is related, discoveries based on one organism can extend to others. Researchers can use what are called model organisms. They may use green algae, chlorella, to study photosynthesis. Why would they do this? Could be reason that photosynthesis is the same in plants as it is in algae. Chlorophyll in algae is same chlorophyll found in trees, flowers, ferns, etc. These assumptions can be made because all plants and algae are closely related. Alright, here's another progress check. We have 4 questions this time. Let the last few slides sink in, and when you're ready, do your best to answer these questions. Next, we are going to learn about the organization of living things and their need for energy. Due to physics, organized entities tend to lose their organization over time. They become more disorganized. Living things require energy in order to combat this. Organization is common in living systems, from molecules to ecosystems. Cells require energy to make complex molecules like carbohydrates, nucleic acids, proteins. This organization is essential for cells to function within a multicellular organism. Life is organized by the interactions of atoms making molecules, molecules making cells, cells making tissues, tissues making organs, organs making organ systems, and organ systems making an organism. As you can see from this diagram, there's a clear hierarchy of complexity within living organisms. These organisms interact with their physical environment and with each other. This is one of the aspects of ecology. This can result in a hierarchical structure within the biological world. A group of interacting similar organisms make populations. Different interacting groups of populations make communities. And different interacting communities together form an ecosystem. And all these ecosystems interact to form the biosphere. All these interactions form systems. A system is a set of interacting parts in which neither the parts nor the whole can be understood without taking into account the interactions. Systems are found at every level of biological organization. Here's an example of a general system. You have components A, B, and C. You cannot truly understand the system without understanding the interactions of A and B, or the interactions between B and C. This slide has 3 examples of biological systems. We will look at the first one as an example. The first component is the amount of free amino acids within a cell. The second component is the amount of protein T in the cell. This occurs due to the synthesis of protein T, which would be the interaction. The next interaction occurs between the amount of protein T in the cell and the amount of breakdown of cell products. This interaction is the breakdown of T protein, which would increase the amount of broken down cell products. Sometimes these concepts of biological systems can be a little confusing for students. Sometimes it is best to think of these as steps, which they are. So with our previous example, the first step is the amount of free amino acids, the second step being the amount of T protein. This occurred due to the synthesis of T protein. The third step is the breakdown of cell products. To get to this step, the T protein needs to be broken down. One of the takeaway messages from the last few slides is that biological systems are dynamic. This is due to the flow of energy through them. They constantly exchange energy with their surroundings. This can be due through food webs or due to the flow of matter, such as water or nutrients. This can all depend on the amount of sunlight or food that is found within the system. Alright, last progress check for this section. Answer these two questions, then head on to part 2 of chapter 1. Congratulations on making it through the first of many lectures. Thank you for listening.